Today's our 7th anniversary of these morning shows. 7 years ago on February 10th, 2008. And it's just so fortunate that we have Tony Hunt as our poet today, because he was the first poet ever at these Sunday morning things. Please, everybody, welcome Tony Hunt.
Thank you very much, David. It is terrific to be here. It's absolutely terrific. 7 years is a long time. I remember, I'll just refresh your memory. I went to the very first performance, and I'd never met Felix before. And afterwards, we had a cup of coffee, my wife and I and Felix. We were sitting in the Flying Star. And I said, you know, that was really great this morning, but it would be terrific if we had some poems in between. And he said, you're hired. Oh, it is great. Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely. I noticed on the program some weeks ago, at the bottom of the program, it says the Witter Bynner Foundation for Poetry. Anybody who knows me knows that I like to read a couple poems by other people besides myself. And so I looked up Witter Bynner. I'd actually taught a couple of his poems in a modern poetry course that I was teaching years ago when I was teaching. And so I looked him up. And I looked up the foundation. The foundation, of course, is up in Santa Fe. And he was a really remarkable guy. He was born in 1881, wrote hordes of lyric poems. He was an editor, a publisher, knew Wallace Stevens and people, went to Harvard, was a great Orientalist. One of the first great translations of poems from Chinese came through Witter Bynner. And then I looked, as a tiny little fact, his partner in Santa Fe, he lived with him for 30 years. His partner's name was Robert Hunt. My brother's name was Robert Hunt. No relation. So anyway, the foundation says that they support places like this that have an awareness of the positive effects of poetry on society. So you're society, and I'm supposed to have an effect on you. Here's a short poem by Witter Bynner called Wistaria, 1923. Clouds dream and disappear. Waters dream in a rainbow and are gone. Fire dreams change with the sun or when a poppy closes. But now is the time of year for the dark earth, one by one, to show her slower dreams. And nothing she has ever done has given more ease to her perplexities than the dreaming of dreams like these. Not irises, not any spear of lilies or cup of roses, but these pale purple images, as if from willows or from pepper trees, shadows were glimmering on Buddha's knees. It's a lovely poem, a really lovely poem. So yesterday was Valentine's Day, and I went out to see 50 Shades of Grey. Actually, that's not true. When I first saw 50 Shades of Grey, when I first came across the book, I thought it was instructions on hair coloring for adults. Anyway, this has nothing to do with that. I need to read a love poem, and I chose a love poem by one of the great lyric poets of our time, E. Cummings. Most people know him as a guy who messed around with punctuation and words, but he wrote some of the greatest love poems that have ever been written, I think, in the English language. So here's one called Somewhere I Have Never Traveled Gladly Beyond. It was 1931. Somewhere I have never traveled gladly beyond any experience. Your eyes have this silence. In your most frail gesture are things which enclose me, or which I cannot touch because they are too near. Your slightest look easily will unclose me. Though I have closed myself as fingers, you open always, petal by petal, myself. As spring opens, touching skillfully, mysteriously, her first rose. Or if your wish be to close me, I and my life will shut very beautifully, suddenly, as when the heart of this flower imagines the snow carefully everywhere descending. Nothing which we are to perceive in this world equals the power of your intense fragility, whose texture compels me with the color of its countries, rendering death and forever with each breathing. I do not know what it is about you that closes and opens. Only something in me understands. The voice of your eyes is deeper than all roses. Nobody, not even the rain, has such small hands. And that great line, what a line, what a great line. Oh, what a great line. Well, I want to read you a few of my own poems. This first one is called Getting a Haircut in Point Richmond. It's an old poem, and it's dedicated to some friends of ours, Bob and Joan Cohn. The theme of the poem actually is about doing and not merely being. Bob and Joan have just walked 1,000 miles from Le Puy in France all the way to Santiago de Compostela on the way, the Camino. 1,000 miles on their feet. That's doing. So this is a short poem. We sat in their house in Point Richmond, California, babysitting for them, for their dogs, some years ago while they were off on a trip. And from their house in Point Richmond, you can see the three of the bridges. You can see the San Rafael Bridge, the Oakland Bay Bridge, and the Golden Gate Bridge. It's an incredible setting. Surrounded by fruit trees and flowers, I am sitting outside on the deck in a rather functional chair. In the afternoon air, Susan is cutting my hair. She has done this for years. She does it with ease. The dogs scratch at their fleas. One may be proud of doing, but not in mere being. The pipes in the kitchen are clogged and need fixing. One can be proud of baking a cherry pie. There is no pride in race or gender, beauty or biology. Accidents are not deeds. Wind over San Francisco Bay. And then I'd like to read you two poems, and then I'll be done. These are poems that my wife and I write every year. We've been doing it for 15 years. At the New Year's time, one of us paints a painting, that would be my wife, and one of us writes a poem, that would be me. And we put these on a card and give them to 100 of our friends for our New Year's. So I'm going to read two of them. They go out like this, except that this little image that you see here would be the front of the New Year's card. So sometimes Susan paints the painting and I write the poem. Sometimes I write the poem and she paints the painting. This is this year's New Year's card. It's called The Other Side. Dreams, in the form of words, often come to me, especially in the early morn, especially when my back hurts and it's difficult to get out of bed. And so it was I found myself lying in the softness of the early dawn, writing in my head about the yard behind the house we bought some years ago. We really love our backyard. A modest square of land enclosed by wooden slats, a 3-sided fence, just a little taller than myself, so I can't quite see what's on the other side. Shrubs of lilacs for the bees grow near the fence. In a far corner of the yard, a ponderosa pine where the cooper's hawk hangs out, and the pigeons coo. It looks down upon it all. The ground's not quite flat. There's a mini slope, a small mountain for the ants and other crawly things to break the view. Susan's painted birds, counterparts of life, exist upon our slatted fence. The road runner's there, a lizard in his beak, a tanager, a jet black crow, a flicker, and a ladderback. From time to time, I've seen these feathered narcissists drop in to look at how they look. Through springtime and in summer, even in the early fall, in the middle of the yard, roughly bordered by some boundary stones, a magic patch of emerald grass reveals itself. A pathway by the bird bath winds its way through all. Scarlet spires and purple sage illuminate the air. Their tint attracts the whir of hummingbirds. Moss roses burst into beauty from the ground. Susan waters everything and keeps it trim. Outside the circle's rim, extending to the fence, the ground is covered up in shredded chips of bark. Now that it's winter, it all looks a little dark. It's such an overwhelming paradise of sorts, a reality that creeps into my foggy sense that I can't help wondering, especially now in age, especially when it's difficult to get out of bed, what might be on the other side of the fence. Thank you. And I'd like to close in the name of anniversaries. My wife and I celebrated our 50th anniversary this past year. We've put up with each other that long. And we first met in West Africa when we were in the Peace Corps together. So I have this poem. I've only read this once before in public. It's about lots of things. It's called In the Numinous Dark. There's an epigraph. Dark, dark, dark. I said to my soul, be still and let the dark come upon you. That's T.S. Eliot in the Four Quartets. 50 years ago, more or less, uninformed, I found myself in West Africa under the dark continent's hump. West of the Cross River and Cameroon, west of Oran and Calabar towns, some 8 miles north from the sea's shore, the bights of Benin and Biafra, now Bani, the Gulf of Guinea, where the slave trade arose, that curving coast where humanity turned away from being humane. East from Port Harcourt and Niger's swampy outflow, south of Uyo, in the midst of a tangle of trails, muddied by tropical rain, crossing dank rivers on logs, in Akai, close by the Kwaibo River that leads to the sea. For 2 solid years, plunked down on a paved road, starting from nowhere I knew, going somewhere equally strange and unknown, alone in a small house surrounded by the dark green tropical bush with mosquitoes and snakes, dancing by moonlight, drumming at dawn, perhaps in this place a teacher to be. In that dark, over time, where my students taught me to see, malaria visited me, and so did my bride, soon to be. While I worked on my life, Kennedy died. The students in black stood in long lines at my door. One by one, each took my hand, shaking his head. Wonderful, full of wonder, each said. Soon after, I spent a night by myself at the beach, down the long road, switched to the canoe, sweep down with the tide to the sea. Alone on the sands of that shore, the universe seen from my tiny spot on the spiraling globe. In that dark, see the brilliance of billions of stars, awful stars, full of awe, always, forever, beyond reach. Everything turned. Somehow, I learned to become whatever I am. I'm pretty sure it all started there in that radiant dark. Look at me now, married still in love, still happy, such as that goes. 2 grown-up kids with kids of their own, a grandfather still touching life. Full of wonder and awe, looking back at the life I never knew would happen to me. Dark, dark, dark. Without the immersion in night, how can one savor the shimmering light?